Welcome back to CMS-Connected, the web content management industry's only news commentary show. We're talking today, myself, Butch Stearns of the Pulse Network, co-host along with Scott Liewehr of Digital Clarity Group. We are talking about the shift in big data and the opening of new doors and the possibilities that are being created for that. And to talk more about that subject, we bring in Seth Earley from Earley & Associates. Seth, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you.
Yeah, we got you in the hot seat, so you're going back and forth. So stay on me for a couple of seconds. Sure. For people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Earley & Associates.
So actually, Earley & Associates has been in business for about 20 years. This is actually our 20th year, interestingly. So yeah, I know, it's gone very quickly. And the work that we've done is mostly focusing on data from the perspective of unstructured content, information architecture, metadata, taxonomy, and then all of the different types of systems and processes that feeds into.
So to get right into our subject, let's talk about that. And let me ask you this basic question, because I always like people that are experts in the field of big data. Simplify it for us. Give us your definition today of big data.
Okay. So, you know, there's a technical view of this. So traditionally when people talked about big data, they're talking about enormous amounts of data, really large amounts. So, you know, the amount of the information that Walmart deals with and information that was, you mentioned this before, too big to be handled by traditional types of relational database systems. So they needed new ways to deal with that. But now that definition has evolved, right? Because most organizations are dealing with enormous amounts of information coming from many different sources. So clickstream data, customer information that's coming from multiple marketing systems, any type of an industry that deals with a lot of information like healthcare, you know, patient records, electronic medical records, claims information. So when you start looking at that, and you start looking at all these different sources of information, it's the volume of information, it's the variety, the velocity, the fact that it changes very, very quickly. Social data, social graph data, that's another area. So there's lots of different sources of information that enterprises are dealing with. A huge proliferation of applications. When you look at the typical marketing suite that an organization needs to deal with, they deal with customer relationship management systems and web content management systems and email marketing systems and social media systems and marketing asset management, marketing resource management, digital asset management. You go on, and all of these systems are kicking off streams of information, streams of data. And all of that behavioral information where the customer is interacting will kick off streams of data. And it's a matter of how do you deal with that? How do you interpret it? How do you make sense of it? How do you use it to achieve some kind of a business outcome? So that's really where we start thinking about it in a typical day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that purist definition that I alluded to and that you described here was much more fake. You know, one would think if that were the case, that the challenges associated were kind of more about where do I store it, how do I access it, all of that. And what you're talking about, which is relevant regardless about the amount of size of it, is how to get inferences from it. How do I glean insights from all this information?
That's right. So one organization that we worked with is using it from a predictive perspective. So it's a banking organization. They found that certain things that customers do in terms of their behaviors will indicate whether they're going to leave the bank, right? And then they can predict, they can say, okay, we're seeing these customers with these kinds of behaviors. I can do something. I can have some kind of intervention, right? I can call on them. I can send them an offer. I can reduce their overdraft charge. I can do something that's going to prevent them from defecting to another bank. That's a predictive analytic, and that's very, very powerful.
So Brian, we're talking about big data, the shift in big data. This is CMS-Connected, the web content management industry's only news commentary show. My name is Butch Stearns of the Pulse Network. Scott Liewehr, the co-host from Digital Clarity Group, is alongside. We're joined in studio by Seth Earley from Earley Associates. How has big data changed your world in particular?
Well, what's interesting about our world, you know, we're a consulting firm, so we have to deal with our customers and helping them make sense of this. And for the most part, you know, what we're doing is we're giving them the mechanisms to get their house in order, to help them cut across multiple systems and processes. In other words, you know, the work that we've done has always been important in and of itself in terms of making sense of unstructured information or making it easier to do business intelligence. But now it's essential. It's part of the table stakes, so to speak. So organizations are looking to us to help them, get their house in order, to cut across multiple silos of information and be consistent with language and terminology.
Right, and you mentioned the V's, the volume, the velocity, the variety, and how about the veracity of it? I hear IBM talk about that all the time, meaning that, to me, one of the big things about big data is that there's just so much more of it now. Oh, you think of us as individuals, the data we create, and then you think of a business. So somebody said this to me a long time ago. What it's really about is getting the right information in the right hands of the right people at the right time. So when you think of it that way, when you talk about how it's changed your world, I find it interesting what you said, because add on now times a million. Oh, like when we were kids, times infinity, because you just create so much more data.
Yeah, and it really is interesting when you think about an individual, and you just mentioned that we kick off lots of data on our day-to-day basis, right? When we're shopping online, when we're making phone calls, when we're traveling, we carry iPhones, and these iPhones are kicking off information for every one of those applications is tracking us. Geofencing is an interesting concept, because what you can start to do now is say, okay, here's a person who is a female, 30 to 35 years, has a graduate degree, drives a BMW, likes yoga and green products, and now they're in the neighborhood of this organization that I can now tailor a message to her. Think of all that data. Think of all of that context, but it's limitless. I mean, think of all the different contexts that you're in when you go about your day-to-day work or your day-to-day activities. So making sense of that is what
So
is
for both
important.
of you guys, I'm an executive. I'm dealing with this, as you painted the picture, Scott. Consumers have all the power now, right? And if it's a B2B environment, I need to empower my supply chain to be able to address those needs. So how do I not get overwhelmed? How do I address this shift? I know that's a loaded question. How about from both of you? How do we begin that?
Sure. Okay,
You wanna
I can
take
talk.
it?
I think the
Yeah.
first thing is it's the very similar question to how do you eat an elephant, right? You just take one bite at a time, and I think there are some fundamental kind of pillars of this. The first thing is, first and foremost, is you cannot just react based on reading an HBR article that says suddenly this is really important to you, and your entire decision-making process and the way that you work has to fundamentally transform to incorporate data when the processes that you had in place before didn't necessarily.
I call that managing by magazine article.
There you go. I think that's great. You should write about that if you have it. I just think overall the biggest challenge people have is they just feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to react. Oh my gosh, everybody's doing this.
Right.
And the reality is that everybody isn't necessarily doing it. And you have some things that you focus on that you do really well, that make you unique, that make your customers want to use your products or services or whatever. So how can you use data to, in various parts of it, make more efficient your delivery process, your insight about what your customers want so that it affects your product planning processes? So it's basically where to find the pockets and places that basically help to make you do what you do better.
And I totally agree with you. And I think that the fear sometimes that causes people to react, to say, oh, I got to do this, we're going to miss the boat. Now that's a valid fear, right? Because a lot of organizations have missed the boat when they miss technology shifts. And this is a very big technology shift. But the problem is, it's not getting overwhelmed and not feeling like you have to do something right away. It's just what you said, Scott. It's focusing on where can you have a value that you can add to your process, and how does data help you get there? So personalizing that product experience, improving the service experience, getting people that information as they need it. And it's really focusing on that very specific set of processes and saying, how can we impact this, and what data do we already have, and how can we make sense of it? Here's something that's really interesting. There's a study the other day that I read that talked about how most organizations are not even making sense of the call center information that they have, right? So they have all this data. They know what these customer preferences are. They don't act on it.
That's right.
So tell me what a lot of new data is going to do for you when you're not even acting on the data that you have.
Exactly.
Well, from what I'm hearing you both say, it sounds like for advice for executives It's a simple business principle. If you believe in the 80-20 rule that 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers, don't try to reinvent the wheel and put resources towards or find data and focus on data that's not producing revenue for you. You said find the pockets, Scott, and you talked about making it simple and focusing on that point. So you want to try to improve your processes and be more efficient with things that are producing revenue for your business and making your business grow at this point, right?
That's right. It's optimizing what you have, and it's making that business case. It's aligning the business case with you're building a capability, right? And this capability is data and information supports something. It supports a process. And that process is aligned with some capability, right? So whether it's a customer service process or customer acquisition or whatever it might be, and that has to be aligned with the objectives of the organization. So when you have that alignment, when you have that linkage, you can justify things and you can get people to pay attention. That's the other part that happens here. People get overwhelmed, right? They get overloaded. It's like, oh God, I got to think about this now. I already have plenty of things to do. I can't focus on that. I can't worry about it. Like, please don't overwhelm me. But what we're saying is, this is what you're doing anyway, okay? We're going to make it better by helping you understand these insights from this information about this process, and it's that improvement. It's not like squirrel, like shiny bit, right? It's not like, oh, there's a technology, I need to jump on it.
Right.
It's really aligning it with an existing process where you have to achieve something and you can justify that.
And so your focus, historically, I know that you've helped a lot of organizations develop taxonomies, and a lot of this has been about how you can fundamentally set this up so that dynamically I can get the information when I need it,
That's
whether
right.
it's delivering it through a content management
That's
system
right.
or whether it's accessing data in a large organization. So what, from in terms of kind of your core offering then, how are you helping people, besides just preaching to them and
Sure.
saying,
Right.
this isn't too big, and there's the first counseling session we talked about,
Right,
I'm in
right.
some therapy, I'd
Right.
imagine you have
I'm
a couch
setting
too.
up a support group, by
Yes,
the way. So,
good.
yeah,
Yeah,
so I'll
great.
give you the information
I'll
on that.
add-
Big data
It's a great
support.
question. And where do I start if I'm an
Yeah.
executive?
Yeah. So, what we see is, again, it's trying to make sense of what you have today. And many times what we'll find is that organizations will have a source of data and they don't know how to interpret it, right? So they'll have, say, a voice of the customer data.
Yeah, we'll
which
go
is,
back to the call
sure.
center
Yeah,
that you
call
talked
center,
about. Right, so
absolutely.
go there.
Call center data.
Yeah, use
so,
that example.
so that's a great example. So part of one of the things that we did for an insurance company is we said, let's mine the chat data from the call center, because they have chat, they do phone calls, but then they also do chats, right? So they'll ask a question before they call. And so what we wanted to do is say, well, what are the issues that are coming up in chats and how can we mine that and really get a sense of it? And then put that back into the search tools and the customer self-service tools in order to refine those processes. So identifying the issues from chat, and again, it's one of those things where if you had your call center processes right, you would probably be harvesting that in any case. But this is cutting across large amounts of information and then looking for the emergent topics, right? So there's text analytics in there as well. Also doing speech to text, right? So a lot of those call center sessions would be recorded. And essentially what you can do is convert the recordings to text and then mine that text and look for the emergent types of topics that come up and say, okay, here's something that we're not servicing our customer on. Here's a problematic area. This is where we can intervene on the website or the self-service or search or whatever it might be to improve that process. So it's looking for those insights from large amounts of data and then surfacing that back to the customer.
We are talking today on CMS-Connected about the shift in big data, about the opportunities that are being created in the marketplace and in different industries, because as Seth preaches all the time, and Scott, that big data is about all industries. It's not germane to just one industry, and you may be in an industry like finance or healthcare where there's compliance issues, if that's the case, or you may be in a very transactional situation in retail or whatever, or something like that. I think the needs are always the same. So let's talk from the marketplace standpoint. What does this mean for customer experience and competitive advantage in the marketplace?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in terms of customer experience, and they range everywhere from, again, getting that right information to people as they are looking for information on the website. So segmenting your audiences according to lots of different attributes and parameters. And think about it this way. A customer experience is about more than a website, right? It's about all those internal processes that are upstream that are supporting that digital experience. So if you're, the LB GUPS, customer experience, customer lifecycle, learn, buy, get, use, pay, support, used a lot in telecom and others, I learn about a product through some kind of outbound marketing, right? That's one system. Maybe there's outbound marketing, maybe there's website. I buy it through an e-commerce system, and that e-commerce system is giving me other information. I may use it and in telecom, you're actually using the product, so I have other systems that will support that. And then paying for it, you're interacting with accounting systems, and there are people in the back end who are supporting that. You're dealing with call centers, you're dealing with service app. So in each case, there's multiple systems that you're actually interacting with, right? You may be interacting through the website, you may be interacting through call centers, but there's lots of systems. So what you can do with big data is you can start to optimize that by looking at that voice of the customer information, by processing the surveys, processing social media, right? At every step of the process, people are saying something, right? They're talking about your service. They're talking about the fact that your product, is good or bad or indifferent. They're talking about the quality of the call center and the quality of the website. They're having those conversations. So you can harvest that across each step of that process, and you can get insights that actually can be fed into your internal processes. So in other words, you can mine what's going on with voice of the customer and social media and text analytics from lots of different channels to monitor how you're doing internally, right? And those kinds of scorecards can give you a lot of feedback. With one organization, they found that their internal call center was saying that, first time call resolution, we're doing that 80% of the time. Guess what the customers were saying? That most of the time, they were not getting first call resolution. They were doing 2 and 3 and 4 calls, right? So that's what the survey data was saying, but the internal process was saying something different, right? Which are you going to believe? You have to say, this is another data point, but we have lots of those data points across all those processes. So we can build scorecards that will measure our internal processes by cutting across all of these different areas, right?
Yep, I think we've talked, a lot of the discussion of the last 10 minutes has been about that this is not just a technology issue, right?
Absolutely.
It's so much more a state of mind. Do I even know that we have data that can help me make this decision in a more informed way? If so, do I know how to go tap into it? And then can I act accordingly? Can I optimize then my decision afterward by checking back? So it's a big state of mind, I understand. But just talking technically for a bit, are technologies yet set up to kind of really be able to serve customers in a way that they kind of want to with this insight and information? In other words, they're not using, are suddenly call center people using a different system to give them information for how to go and answer this question now? Or is it just being,
How is it actually being manifested?
How is it being manifested? And is it being manifested really, or is there a big landscape here?
I think there's a very big landscape, and I think that when you start to look at the typical, there's an infographic that I love by a guy, I think it's chiefmartech.com.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Scott Brinker.
Yeah,
right?
Scott Brinker. Yeah, he just
love
wrote
this.
that big.
And it's this
all
huge,
those hundreds and hundreds of technologies.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's what the world is coming to, right?
That's
That's
right.
what's happening. All of these things are bubbling up and surfacing and being used all the time. So that shift, all of those tools are using big data. All of them are using in one way, shape, or form, right? In one way, shape, or form, right? I'm not saying that's maybe a blanket statement, but the point is that complex landscape is what we're starting to deal with, and it's weaving those things together to create that user experience. And we just talked about getting the right information to people when they need it.
Right.
That's modeling the user, it's modeling the content, and it's understanding their context. Well, we can do that with lots of systems.
That's right.
But it's very, very difficult, and it's difficult to get that real-time feedback. That's where things are going to be evolving to, right? Pulling all those pieces together in a more real-time fashion. What used to happen is you'd build a model, and it would take you weeks or months to build and validate that model. Well, now you don't have time for that, right? You have to be able to build and iterate and get that feedback right away. So that's what's going to happen. We're going to start to see that shrinking down and seeing these tools make almost real-time value, real-time use of that data.
Yeah.
All right, Seth, let's finish up with a question from our CMS-Connected audience, and this comes in from Amit Xerxes from Sapient Nitro in Delhi. And the question is, how are web content management and marketing automation vendors likely to respond to the need to adopt big data solutions to drive real-time contextualization and personalization?
That's kind of the path that I was starting to talk about. And I think what this is doing is it's starting to say, how can I build an adaptive model? How can I build a model that's going to take the user behavior as they're clicking through, as they're making choices, as they're purchasing or downloading or interacting, and how can I use that to adapt my model? There are lots of different types of machine learning algorithms that can help with that. But it's basically a form of predictive analytics, right? We're trying to model our users, we're trying to understand who they are, and something about their process, right? The way we use this is, we say, if I know who you are, and I know what you're doing, I can get an idea what you need and what you need next, and that's what I'm going to surface to you. I'm going to give you that thing that I think you need. I used to have an assistant who said, my job is to give you what you need before you know you need it. right?
And
That's
I
what we're
think you're
trying
so
to do.
right. And I just want to make one point here that I've made before, and I just recorded a My Five and made the same point, which is that I really believe, and I think you'll do nothing but trumpet what I say here, but I really think that the day of reckoning is coming. And specifically, that question was, typical audience member who's thinking right now about content management systems, marketing automation. These are marketers in our audience oftentimes. The day of reckoning is coming where that phase 2, the inevitable time that I actually try to implement personalization that I've been talking about and that justified my many technology purchases over the past whatever, is coming where, because they haven't cared about the things that you do, metadata, taxonomy, how do I categorize my content, there's two things. Insights is one thing. Having the analytics to be able to help me understand who's working with, who's on the other end of the screen right now is one thing. But being able to deliver content then that feeds those insights is key, right? That's the part that nobody cares about.
I think it's not that they don't care. I think that they don't understand.
They don't know how to deal with it.
They don't know how to do it. And even when you start sitting down, and we were doing this just the other day with a client, we're doing use cases. We're saying, who are these users? Describe them. What do they need? Do they need this piece of content? What are they going to use this piece of content for? This is an organization whose job is to create thousands and thousands of pieces of content. And you know what they said? We've never looked at it that way before. We've never looked at it that way before. We've never looked at our content from that user perspective to say, what are people doing with it? And it's really understanding those users and understanding the tasks and the processes and the things they need, and then starting to surface that as you anticipate. It's understanding the user. It's understanding your customer.
Seth,
It's old stuff, but
thanks for your time on this edition of CMS Connected. He is Seth Earley from Earley and Associates. How do you prefer that people get a hold of you? We're going to show you a website.
You could certainly go to the website, www.early.com, and don't forget the E before the Y. Or you can certainly send me an email, seth@early.com. So just don't forget that E before the Y. But I'd be happy to hear from anybody who has any questions.
Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for being a part of this edition of CMS Connected.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.